Hi, it's Anne-Marie from Charmed Life Therapy again, back with some more thoughts. I've had some more thoughts since yesterday when I made my last video about the why we're in this situation with It Ends With Us and the legal drama. And it's really interesting because I wasn't going to make a video today, but last night I happened to watch a video that Colonel Kurtz had recently made here on YouTube. And she brought on her mother, who is a psych professor, and she kind of wanted her input on it and kind of recapped it. I mean, what she said was that her mother didn't know any details of the case. So Colonel Kurtz, in getting her opinion, asked, basically just said, what would you be thinking if this actress was on this movie? She tried to take control, she was overstepping, she was doing this, she was doing the other, and then it went so far, this director was a bit of a doormat and he was just letting her do this and letting her do that and being too accommodating. I think the mother said, oh, it sounds like, let's just call it being too gracious or something like that. And then went straight from there to her managing to put him in the basement and all of that at the premiere of his own movie. And it highlighted kind of something really interesting for me, because it's kind of like giving somebody the how and the what, but not giving them the why. And it kind of highlighted for me what is the crucial information in all of this. If you kind of drown out some of the noise, as in, this is what he did, this is what she did, this is how it ended up, it kind of highlights what's in the middle and what's the real crux of it, which to me, if I stop spitting all over myself, is I kind of think that it really kind of crystallized it for me last night when I watched this. And it's like, it just boils down to rejection. Because to me, Colonel Kurtz missed out the fundamental piece of information, which was, we know that Justin kept taking and taking, giving and giving and giving when it came to Blake. And it was all kind of going along and he was allowing it and allowing it. But he kind of doubled down, he finally doubled down when she was trying to get him to take blame for her own negative press. And a lot of that negative press, if you remember, was about, what has this Betty Buzz, Blake Brown hair got to do with DV survivors? That's where it came from. And this was the point where Justin and his team said, no, we're not going to take responsibility for all her past interviews and the way she's chosen to market this movie as a big, beautiful Hollywood movie. Well, we're not taking responsibility for that. All of this is her doing. And that is the crux point, because up until that, he had accepted all of that and had accepted being in the basement of his own movie with incredibly good grace compared to what most people would be. But that was the tipping point. And you see, a lot of that is what Blake, I nearly called her Blake Brown, what Blake Lively really needs when she's working with people is people who adore her, who are blown away by the flirting and the fake bubbliness and all of that. We know from like previous interviews where, she's walked into a movie, into the costume department or however it happens, and, there'll be a person there with a whole rack full of clothes all set to go and all of that, and she goes, glasses in and goes, oh no, this is what we're doing, and completely takes over. And kind of people just get swept away with people with big personalities like that, or fake big personalities, whatever the case may be. And this is how she's used to operating. She's used to getting her own way all the time. But this is where this movie has been such a polarizing thing. It's been that perfect storm of the right thing, right time, right place, depending on your perspective. Because she's walked into this small budget movie and she's trying to do her normal thing of taking over and schmoozing the director and trying to fluff him up and flirt with him and be touchy-feely and all the no-teeth thing and the, ball busting and all the rest of it. But what she's not accounted for is that this is a sensible guy with a deep faith background who has a very beautiful, very intelligent, very smart and savvy wife at home who kind of keeps him grounded. You know, he doesn't need this actress fawning all over him in order to kind of make his film and all of that. And you see, for Justin, it's been so hard because as soon as those pictures got out about what this wardrobe was looking like, because he's straight away getting all of that buzz about what is she wearing, why is she wearing like ridiculous clothes for somebody like who's a self-employed florist that's come from a domestic abuse background. Why is she wearing clothes like this? This is not what we signed up for. You know, when we read that book, this is not what we had in mind. And he's had heat from the studio and had to go to her and tell her, you know, we're having pushback on this. You know, and I don't think he can have got anywhere with all of that, and that's probably why he ended up crying in the trailer, if that's true, if he did actually cry in her trailer, because he was in a no-win scenario, wasn't he? But the thing is, I do believe that she tried to come on to Justin, or at very least pushed her luck a lot, or was the one that was too touchy-feely and too kind of overstepping in her language, which we know because we have the text messages and all of that. We know she overstepped when it comes to language. But this is the problem, is that Justin had a real feel for that book. Now, many people kind of are saying, well, I don't really understand, you know, like people that aren't Colleen Hoover fans think, you know, she's not a brilliant writer, she's not all that. It's not the person you'd go to for a book on DV. But the thing is, books touch us in weird ways that we don't always understand. I mean, you know, a lot of people poo-poo 50 Shades of Grey, but for me, something about 50 Shades of Grey really hit home with me, and it actually made me start writing books, because it made me realise, because previously I've been struggling to kind of find a way in, thinking I didn't have enough life experience and things, or that was fun life experience, put it that way. But when 50 Shades came along, it kind of made me realise, well, it can be like a fairy tale. I can just write romance. I don't need to worry about research or anything like that. I can just write. And that might be an into doing different things, but just start there. You know, and I loved it. It touched me, did 50 Shades of Grey. So Justin, for whatever reason, this book resonated with him. These things don't always make sense, but they're there for a reason. But he was bound and determined to make it about the subject matter, and Blake Lively was bound and determined to make it about fashion and being all you can be and all of this, and having all of these multiple facets to yourself, and all of these facets that don't make sense and do make sense and are big and small and loud and quiet, and you know, she goes off on those riffs, doesn't she? So you put yourself in Justin's position, where he's faced with this impossible actress who's overstepping the mark all the time, that's costing extra money, that's flirting with him, that's trying to create something that's the antithesis of what he's trying to do and that he's passionate about. You know, and so he has pushed back in very little ways. And I think the main thing will be that she's not got her own way with him. That he just pushed back in you know, we think he was a doormat, but I think he was pushing back in subtle ways. I mean, it was quite brave of him how he kind of pushed back on the whole penthouse thing when, you know, Blake was there, Ryan was there, Taylor was there. You know, he was quite firm, really, in a nice way, when he messaged back and said you didn't need to do. Remember, that was quite brave. You didn't need to have Taylor and Ryan there, you know, I was already kind of open to listening to what you had to say. But then she messaged back, didn't she, because she didn't like him terming it as her passion. She felt that was belittling. So this is it, you see, it's rejection. He kind of had to tackle her over the wardrobe. He wasn't responding to her either romantic or just overstepping flirtatiousness. She wasn't getting anywhere with that. You know, and then she wanted to do it her own way, so she pushed and pushed and pushed, and she got all of those things. She extorted them out of him. But then all of that the social media thing kicked in when it came to the promotion of it, and people not liking it being about flowers and Betty Boos and hair care products and big beautiful summer movies and grab your friends and wear your florals. Everybody's saying, hey, up, isn't this about DV? You know, where's the focus on that? And Justin was the only one talking about it. So and that was the tipping point really to me, and that's the part that Colonel Kurtz didn't focus on in trying to be brief. And in her doing that, it really highlighted to me, no, the crux of this is that Blake can't handle rejection, and people with actual low self-esteem and low self-worth that have never built up any resilience in their lives because they've never faced real hardship cannot take rejection. She's said it before. I don't know what the meaning of no is. My mum didn't know what the meaning of no was. They don't hear no. So Justin has said no to her over and over again, however subtly, because he's not, you know, he tackled her over the wardrobe. He stood his ground over how he wanted to market the movie. And don't forget maximum effort. You know, Blake's word was saying, Sony says we've got to do it like this. But maximum effort was there in the mix of the marketing campaign, weren't they? So, you know, the marketing efforts were rejected as well, weren't they, in effect, by the public opinion. But because they can't handle rejection, and Blake can't, and, you know, she is beautiful, she is as lovely as she is, as in your face as she is, how can you possibly reject her? How can you possibly say no to her? No, you can't. There must be something wrong with you if you have to, if you reject her, if you can't see her worth, her value, that her opinion is always right. And that was the crux of it when Justin Baldoni would not take responsibility for all of her past interviews and for the way that she'd chosen to market his movie. You know, she could chite all over him basically, but he wasn't going to take responsibility for it. He wasn't going to say, oh yeah, I walked into that myself. You know, she did it to herself, but she could not take accountability for that. And so somebody had to be to blame. And that is what an ego-minded person will always do. There will always be somebody else that is wrong for it. So this is a really crucial thing. It does come down to, as human beings, that we don't, you know, we fear rejection. And if she's always got her way her whole life by being flirtatious, by being touchy-feely, I mean, with the best will in the world, you imagine Paul Feig, who's, I don't know him very well, but I think it's showing us a lot about him in terms of how he's handling this, and that he's allowed Blake Lively to kind of be a bit abusive in another simple favour, in terms of adding extra words in post-production that are kind of poking fun at Justin Baldoni's lawyer and one or two other bits. So we know Paul Feig just lets Blake Lively get her own way, and it will be because she's being flirtatious and touchy-feely and being a bit risque and a bit rubbing his arm, and he probably likes all of that as a man of a certain age. You know what I mean? You know, I'm not being awful to men there, but you know, they do get their heads turned, some men, relatively easily, you know, whereas Justin Baldoni, in a very safe, secure relationship, strong, grounded, you know, can roll with the punches. Paul Feig, oh, yeah, I like a little bit of buttering up from the pretty young thing with all the hair, and yeah, you just do what you want, Blake, it doesn't matter, you know, blah, blah, blah. You know, of course he thinks she's all right, she's fine. He's not got a problem with her because he's not getting the same pushback, you know. Justin was trying to make a certain movie a certain way, and he was passionate about that DV aspect of it. Paul Feig was trying to make a movie about triplets having sex with each other, basically, wasn't he? You know, and just about nothing making sense and everything being convoluted and unnecessary and all about big hats and fancy shoes. That is not what Justin Baldoni was trying to do. You know, it's completely different. She was trying to change the whole narrative of Justin Baldoni's movie, with the costume, with the rewriting of scenes, behind the scenes, there were probably more scenes that were trying to be more of that glib humour that Blake and Ryan like, and it wasn't fitting for that subject, because it wasn't just that Justin Baldoni wanted to direct some romantic summer movie. He wanted to make a movie about DV, about empowering women. And anybody that has been through DV or something similar, you know that you just don't bounce back from something like that and, you know, wipe it off and, you know, fine, you just tap into another aspect of it itself. It's a long, slow process coming back from that, and it's very complex. And you have dips and you go backwards and forwards and all the rest of it. It's not the subject of a big, beautiful summer blockbuster movie. You know, she was so proud of making it feel that way, but the only thing that was that about it was the fancy clothes she put into it, that she made it over the top glamorous where it didn't need to be, where she could have just been in, you know, quite simple clothes that a working woman who was working with her hands and doing messy things, the kind of things that she would be wearing, you know. So that is it. That is the core of this problem, and what we need to keep coming back to is that the core of the problem was that Blake Lively felt rejected in various different ways, and she sought revenge for that, basically. She threatened them at the time when she wanted them to read out that letter that Ryan and her had composed. She threatened, if you don't do this, then I'm going to go to the New York Times and I'm going to start some shit. That's what she said, basically. So it is extortion. There's no getting around that. But what it boils down to is that sense of rejection. And I do still think that Taylor Swift, because I was Googling and I just double checked when the Eras tour kind of was on. And it was all during that time when filming would have been going on. So you imagine how busy Taylor Swift would have been and how she'd have been flying over the world, doing those long shows, sleeping when she could sleep, handling her other business stuff in the meantime, recording Tortured Poets Department, doing all of that to do with that. You imagine all of the work that goes behind that last couple of years Taylor Swift was having. She was not all over It Ends With Us. I think kind of they've set him up for that Penthouse meeting that, I'll come over, we'll discuss it or whatever. And Blake's had a word to Ryan or vice versa, and said, well, we'll invite Taylor, or we'll kind of dovetail that in, and just her being there will be an extra little undercurrent of threat, because who, you know, get the other powerful person on. But I imagine Taylor was either sat there or walked in or whatever it was and thought, oh, I'm a bit out of place here. I probably shouldn't be part of this meeting. It's not my business. It's not particularly something I want to be involved in right now. But like any friend does, she's kind of supported a friend, not realised what a friend was doing. You know, how many of us out there have had the wool pulled over our eyes by a friend, or walked ourselves into situations by not questioning somebody else's motives just because we love and care for them, or they've been nice to us, or whatever it is. We forget we don't know everything that's in that person's mind. And I feel like Taylor kind of fell into that by accident. I'm not saying she hasn't done anything, but I really do think, as somebody who puts together productions from start to finish, knowing like the timeline and how quickly that movie was due to come out, that with a couple of months to go, she's like, no, you have to fire your composer and you have to do this. Because I believe Taylor would have had respect for Justin Baldoni, because I don't truly believe that Taylor in any sense ever thought that Justin Baldoni had SH'd Blake Lively. You know, I think possibly Taylor has caught on to Blake in this scenario a lot earlier than we think she has. I think she's probably known significantly before the trouble came out. She didn't know about the dragons thing, but I suspect she's known where this was heading a lot earlier. I think she's got wind of some stuff. But yeah, when you take out what she did, i.e. taking over the movie and all of that, when you take that out and take out the other end and the outcome and him ending up in the basement, you're left with the middle as to why would she do that. And the number one cause why most people do things is rejection, or a fear of rejection, you know. And he kind of did he was in a no-win situation. He had to reject her. He had, you know, because he loved his wife, he loved his children. He wasn't interested in being pawed by another woman. He wasn't interested in making a big, beautiful something. Of course, he wanted to make money, but he didn't want to make a fluffy, big, beautiful summer blockbuster flowery movie. He wanted to make a movie about DV. So he was hanging on by the edge of his teeth, or whatever you want to call it, for the whole thing, wasn't he, really? And when push comes to shove, he said no. It was like a final rejection, if you like, to me, that saying, I will not accept responsibility for what you've done to yourself and what essentially you've done to my movie as well. I will not take responsibility for that. That is when it's really hit the fan. That final piece of rejection, that was kind of the nail in Justin Baldoni's legal coffin, if you like, was that. I think that is the important piece, and the piece that we need to keep coming back to, because whenever there's been pushback against Blake, and if you go Google about the other movie, the rhythm section, how she wangled her way into that, it wasn't really her movie. It wasn't meant to be for her, but she wangled it. And whenever kind of there's been pushback from people, it's never ended well. You know, where she's been able to go in and take over, and people have just, it hasn't been that big a deal, because either there's plenty of money available, or, you know, it's been whoever in control that don't mind being poured on, and, you know, touchy-feely and in inappropriate language and all of that. I think it's probably gone fine, but this has been this perfect storm of small budget movie, a lot of pressure on it, a specific narrative that he wanted to take it, and then you've got this Hollywood actress that boils in, decides she wants to spend, what's it, 650 grand on costume and wear Louboutins and things like that, which are totally inappropriate. And she's tried to steer it in that way with the marketing, and not wanted to talk about DV, which must have been the absolute worst thing ever for Justin Baldoni, to have the lead actress out there for his passion project not talking about the subject matter of the movie. Can you imagine that? How hard that would have been. And just to rub your nose in it, to be marketing booze and hair care products as part of it. Can you imagine the patience Justin Baldoni has had? That he's taken all of that, but in the end he said, I'm not fucking taking responsibility for your negative feedback, for all the things you chose to do. And that's when Blake Lively goes, well, I can't possibly be rejected. Everybody has to love me. Because I don't know, I can't handle rejection. I don't know what rejection is. I can't be rejected, so somebody else must be wrong. Somebody else must be to blame for everything that everybody else is saying. There has to be a mysterious, untraceable smear campaign that is happening against me, because it is impossible for people not to love me, or not to like my behaviours, or not to just take my behaviours as the way it should be. Basically, that my behaviours should be accepted across the board without question. That's what it is, really. That's somebody that cannot handle rejection, and that is the main cause of it. You know, when you need other people all the time to sustain your opinion of yourself. That's what it is, basically. And she had a few too many knocks during this process of It Ends With Us, and that's the real crux of it, and the thing that we should never forget. And we're afraid of rejection a lot as human beings, because it goes back to tribal times when it wasn't safe to be on your own. So rejection is one of our number one biggest fears. But, you know, in this sense, it's just that Blake Lively has no resilience, because all her life she's been given what she needed. She's been allowed to have her own way. Things have been facilitated for her. She's not known hardship. So she's not built up any resilience against pushback or other people saying, no, This is how I want to do it. This is my vision. This is the cost limitations on us. So it has to be this way. And also that the public out there are seeing these pictures and thinking, no, that's not how we see that character. And he's got the pressure of the studio on him to make a profit. Of course he has to tackle her, and of course he has to push back. The poor guy's had no choice over so much of this, you know, and he's paying the price for it, and it's a tough price, because it's all about Blake Lively's ego. That's all it is. It's as simple as that. There's nothing more to it, really. Okay, see you later, but do not forget to like, subscribe and share it if you can at all. That would truly help me. I hope you've enjoyed this. See you later.